Hey, and welcome back to another episode of Rennch. On today's episode, we are going to work on putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. So if you've been following this build, the Blasphemy build, and by the way, if you're brand new here, hit that subscribe button and hit those notifications because this is a really cool project. If you've been following this build, you know that this thing was a crazy wide-body GT2 fiberglass race car. It sat abandoned for 25 years until I bought it, and now I'm converting it back to a really, really cool street car that I'm calling a techno mod. So this build is, if you can imagine it in a 2021 or 2022, I don't know when I'm going to finish this car, Mercedes S-Class, that is what this car is going to get to the best of my ability. So it's going to have a lot of cool modern amenities while still being really analog. I'm calling it a techno mod, and I think maybe I'm the first person to have that, to coin that phrase. Anyway, because of how this thing was modified before and because it was a race car, it's been very, very highly welded on. And so one of the big challenges is that I think when they put the roll cage in the car, it sucked the whole body up. Like, if you watch a few videos ago, you'll see that I had to use a floor jack to spread the rear frame rails just to get the centerpiece, the inner centerpiece, into the car. So I don't really know what's in store for me in terms of assembling this thing to look like a normal car, because the plan is I'm going to assemble it to normal specs before I start highly modifying it. I have two strategies that I can employ to make sure that this thing goes back together the way it's supposed to. Number one is to utilize the factory mounting points for whatever I have to bolt on the car before I start welding the quarter panels on. And that's where these come in. So these are factory rear bumpers off a 1969 911, and they bolt right onto the underside of the car. And then this is a center panel made by Dansk. This is a beautifully built, solid piece. The goal is, can I bolt these things up to the car and then mount my quarter panels correctly within spec? Question is, how do I know if it's within spec? And here's what I did. And this is kind of my ace in the hole. So Restoration Design has on their website the factory spec drawings of the 911. I think they probably have the 356, they have the 912, but what I've done is I took them over to Kinko's, and it's still Kinko's, let's not be silly, and I had them blown up into this poster size, and this is what they look like. So what's cool is I have millimeter references all over the car. So the plan for today's episode is let me bolt all of this stuff back on the car, see if I can get these bumpers to mount, and start comparing numbers to the factory specs. If I'm within spec, it is not inconceivable that I could lay a couple of tack welds down, if not this video, on the next video to actually get the rear of the car permanently installed, which is thrilling to me because I really want to tackle the front end of the car, which seems like a massive challenge at the moment, but we're going to see how that goes. So let's time-lapse this thing, and I'm going to bolt these panels onto the car and see how close we are. So here's the quick tour. At first glance, everything really looks great. Like this thing is, I mean, it's not perfect, but I've never done this before. So I really don't know what to expect, but just in terms of being, I mean, pretty close. Everything's loose right now, and it kind of bolts up the way it's supposed to. These bumpers being mounted, they're not very tight, but you can see that I can easily adjust this so that this curve matches the way it's supposed to. It's just a little bit of back and forth. There's some adjustability in here. And These notches here are a little off. If I try to put another screw in, I can't really do it. But in general, I think this thing looks really good. The gap here is great, and it kind of expands a little bit too far here. Now I'm told a fix for your gap not being right is to actually tack down and put some weld material where you need it. So it kind of looks like if I was able to tack this thing up the way it is now, then I would probably have to put a little bit of weld up here to shut this gap a little bit. Or I can try to kind of scooch the whole quarter forward a little bit. Meanwhile, the gap on this side is like right on the money. I've got a little magnet here that I've been using as my little gap measurement tool, but that thing looks really good pretty much all the way down. It's a little tight here on the bottom, but I think I can I can pull this thing back just a teeny bit, just like that, to make that gap work. But I think this thing looks really good. So I'm gonna throw the deck lid on here, just kind of sit it on top, and then I'm gonna start double checking measurements. It's hard for me to believe that this is the same car that I got that had this crazy wide body kit, but gap wise, I'm feeling like this is really close. You know, I don't feel like I would be too far out of turn to say that we are pretty much ready to clean this thing up and weld it. Let me shut this door so you guys can see the whole rear end here. It's crazy how the colors contrast, right? The black and red, but I mean, again, it really looks pretty darn straight. And let's break out the old tape measure and see what kind of measurements we can take and see how close we are. Now, the first measurement I want to do is kind of the inside part of the quarter panel, and that says 866 plus 1. So I guess that means it can be 866 or 867. This is, of course, specifically why I got a tape measure that can do millimeters. But I did a little trick here, and I had one of these, you know, like $2 yardsticks, and I've just taken the yardstick and cut it to 867 millimeters. So this is really like the critical part for me. And if we look here, between these two, tip to tip, this thing is right on the money. So I know then that this thing is exactly 866 mil, which is the factory spec. What I don't know is if this measurement is anywhere. So let's go find out. So it's a little crazy. I've got this whole box section, which is the inside chassis section, inside of the quarter panels. But most of this stuff has been cut away, which is a bit of a challenge. Now, I could potentially do these motor mounts, which are 572 plus minus half a millimeter. I'll bet you I'm nowhere close to that. Here's what I can do though. Let's try this one. This one's 376 mil to the center point of the latch panel from the inside of the motor mount. I may not even be using these motor mounts. We'll see. So there-ish to there-ish, 70, 76, 376. Right on the numbers. I gotta say that I'm convinced. I think I'm close enough now that I can start preparing these panels for welding. You can see I've ground off this, but I've got to drill spot weld holes here, certainly through this part. I've got to fix this dent. Somehow I dented this thing right here. I got to fix that and get that thing all straightened out. I've got to drill spot weld holes along this edge and here, and then all the way along the inside, as well as grinding it off and making clean metal out of it. Grind this off, drill a couple spot weld holes. I've got to fix some stuff in the chassis, which I'll do today. And basically just prep all these panels and get them ready for final welding. Well, I mean, I think we're pretty darn close here. As I mentioned, I'm gonna just kind of drill and prep out all these panels right now. I may or may not leave the camera on for it, but you know what it looks like to drill. And I'll show you guys in the next video how I prepared it, so it shouldn't be anything too crazy. But if anybody has done this before or anything like this, you know, please feel free to comment below. I feel pretty good about, I mean, I'm a guy who has literally zero experience doing this kind of major rear end reconstruction. So I feel pretty good about how close it is and how this thing is turning out. So I'm really excited about it. And yeah, and honestly, I'm really like ready to be done with this whole rear so we can get the front dialed, get the car like to basic, and then show you some cool stuff I'm gonna do. But I'm gonna sneak preview something for you right now, which I'm really, really stoked about. Check this out. If you've been following the build a little bit, you know that I want this thing to have a little bit of curve to it. I don't want full RSR wide body because I've already done that. And plus it's a pain in the butt to get tires for it, and it is a bit of a challenge. I love how it looks, but I do want curvy. SC curves are maybe not enough, and RSR are too much. So I have procured some SC flares for this car, but we're not going to use them the way you think. What I have here in my hand is a right rear. So this is the passenger side rear flare for a 911 SC. Check this out. So check out how well this flipped flare, that right there and right there, molds to the car. Are you kidding me? So here's the plan. I'm gonna weld these SC flares backwards onto the front fenders. Then I'm going to take turbo front flares, which are like this on the old Gray Ghost. These front flares will be flipped and used on the rear end of this car. So this one will have the ability to do like a nice healthy 275 in the rear and maybe like a 225 or something in the front, and have just enough lip and enough curve that, you know, when you're hanging out at that stoplight and you see the little red, you know, reflecting off the side of the car, that it's friggin' amazing. So that's what I'm gonna do. I've literally never heard of anybody doing this before. So I like to think that I'm innovating in this case. So I've decided to continue this video and actually put that rear panel on. I'm gonna weld it on today. And the idea, by the way, there's someone killing a bird or something over here. I don't know if you guys can hear that. What I'm gonna do is work from the center bottom around the outside. I think I'll probably put like a tack weld or one hole, and I'm gonna put a couple of screws on each side, and that's gonna really secure the entire piece to the body. And then as I weld, I will just continue to use my vice grips to really clamp the thing really firmly to the body, put a weld, and I'm just gonna go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And then on the top, you can see that this thing sandwiches on itself. So what I'll do is I'll put a couple of holes in the top part of the chassis. That will enable me to weld down into this outer panel. And then I'm gonna have to grind all that completely flat so I can put the quarter panel on top, put spot holes in that, and then weld that to the top. So that's what's gonna create the sandwich. But right now, I think I'm just gonna, again, start kind of on the bottom and then work my way outside. And then hopefully we'll have a fully welded panel by the end of this video. So I've got like just a little bit of wiggle room here, but it's not too much. And really the main thing I'm looking at is on the inside here, I want to make sure that this part, this latch, is totally centered in where it's supposed to be in here. And then the rest of it is just sort of, you know, it's just gonna mount flush to the rest of the car. Plan one, stick a weld right here. Then I'm putting screws in each one of these two corners. Then I'm gonna probably work on, actually then I'll probably fit the quarter panels back on and make sure everything is still looking the way it's supposed to. And then once that's done, I will be able to, yeah, just kind of finish it off and keep cranking on it. Right now I'm kind of looking at this spacing and it looks like it, well, looks like it's okay, but maybe it's rotated a little bit. I mean, these are just like millimeters of rotation, like a millimeter left and right, but I want to make sure I'm at least even in parallel where I can be. And I'm sort of paying attention to all the little details. So for this, I have my welder set about in the middle, a little more voltage because I want the weld to be really flat. I don't want it to stick out too much and have to grind a ton. Anyway, yeah, let's just fire it up and see how we do. The welder, by the way, works so much better when you plug it in. Like, it's so much easier to use. All right, dudes, we are officially welded on across the board. I put just a little bit here. Let me get into the shade. I put a little bit here between the two and went all the way, went all the way along the bottom, and then again, just a little bit right here. I'm gonna take the welds down initially. I've been using this thing, which is like kind of a stone, but it makes like really short work of welds. You got to be really light, not dig in too much. And what's cool about it is you can use the side. So I can get into these spots. So the plan is I'll get in there and do the sort of the tops of all the welds, and then I'll come in with my little belt sander and smooth it out a little bit. Once that's all done, a little pour 15 and we should be good to go. Looking good. Okay, here we are, cleaned up. And what I'm gonna do is just hit this thing with a really quick weld through primer and call it a day. Well, that was a crazy cool day. I did not expect to get as much done today as I did. I definitely did not expect to get that whole back panel on. It's amazing that a few months ago, the rear of this car looked like this, and now it looks like this. And I mean, you may or may not believe this, but I have little experience with any of this stuff. I bought a welder from Craigslist and I'm just diving into this thing head first. And trust me, if I can do this, you can definitely do this. This is, you know, obviously a pretty major overhaul as far as the rear of a car and really the whole build goes. But Like, I don't want people to be intimidated by it. It's just metal. And if you mess it up, you can cut it or re-weld it or hire someone who's better than you at doing it. So thank you guys for being here on the journey. If you could do me a favor, if you're this far along, hit that thumbs up. It makes a huge difference to the YouTube algorithm. So if you wouldn't mind, and you've made it this far, would love if you would hit that thumbs up and even leave a comment, even if it's like a, go team, high five. You can even just put high five and I will appreciate your efforts. So with that, we are this much closer to getting the quarter panels on, and I could not be more excited to get that whole thing buttoned up so I can start working on the craziness that's going to be the front end of this build. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. I'll see you next time.